Before census takers ever knocked, before the church bells of Lexington ever faded into dust, a leather-bound ledger sat waiting. It was May of 1831, and on a single page inside it, 3 weddings were recorded. 3 brides were named, and for each groom only a long silent dash. This was not an oversight. It was a signal, a decision made not in ink, but in omission. Not a disappearance, but an erasure. While you're here, leave a comment with where and when you're watching, from country, year, decade. We may be scattered across timelines, but tonight, we're stepping into the same mystery. And if this story speaks to something deep in you, consider subscribing to Sleepy History Tales. We're about to unfold something that was folded too tightly for too long. In the brittle springtime ledger of Christ Covenant Church, long hidden behind a loose brick in the vestry wall, the month of May holds something off. Bound in aging calfskin, its pages whisper rather than speak. 3 back-to-back marriage entries, each listing a local woman, each followed by a groomless line. May 3rd, Eliza Marrow, daughter of Olden Marrow Cooper. May 10th, Rebecca Ward, a laundress from Mount Street. May 24th, Anna Blythe, just 17, noted only with the line "with mother's permission." Each entry followed proper form for the time father's profession, names of witnesses, and the elegant wax seal of the officiant, Reverend Silas Meekum. But where every husband's name should have been, there was only a solitary, unwavering dash, long, intentional, cold. Now here's where it sharpens. By law, the church was required to submit copies of these weddings to the Fayette County Clerk. But when archivist Judith Price reviewed those submissions in 1878, she found a quiet hole where May 1831 should have been. In her margin note still kept in the county's accession logs, she scrawled May 1831 void file. 3 entries undocumented. Lexington at the time had a population of just over 6,000 asas. Records weren't perfect, but marriage entries, they mattered. Property inheritance land, your ability to claim it, often rested on a union's legal standing. And yet, these 3 unions bore no legal weight. A dash offers no proof. And yet, the women were listed as wed. Then, in 1835, a new clue surfaced. Tucked inside the mayor's old appointment roster, a faded receipt, just a slip bearing the heading, "Payment Received." 3rd pew south wall, Christ Covenant. Buyer's name, another dash. Signed again by Reverend Meacham. And what became of the bride's, Eliza Marrow's family plot near Gratz Park? Bare stones for her father-mother siblings, but no Eliza. Rebecca Ward. Her name reappears once in a sanitation log from 1832 beside the word evicted under a list titled Residences Condemned. Anna Blythe vanishes entirely. Not a census, not a grave, not a line. During the 1930s, a few faint memories were gathered by WPA historians. An elderly man born in 1840 recalled Reverend Meekum as a man precise with ink and sermon, but far from folk. A woman named Hetty Clark spoke of a spring stretch when every pew wore black veil for 3 straight Sundays. She said not a word was spoken. Just veils, just waiting. Deacon minutes from June 1831 mention procedural irregularities but no names. One page ends mid-sentence. Conducted without civil authentication, though solemnized within. Then a tear down the middle as though something didn't want the rest read. The ledger still exists, fragile but intact. And under magnification, those 3 dashes seem different. Not the same ink, not the same pen, perhaps not even the same hand, but it's the final clue that stops the heart. Tucked between the binding folds beside the May entries, a scrap of parchment barely large enough to hold a breath. No date, no signature, just a single line written so delicately it nearly fades into the paper. A name spoken without record is a marriage to silence, and beneath it, not a dash, but the faintest outline of a circle, drawn. With a trembling hand, archivists turned the page. June 1st. No ceremonies performed. Weather fine. 1 pew left vacant. Beneath the southern transept of Christ Covenant, a narrow vault houses what's known as the wedding pour. A chest, brass-handled, rests quietly there. Inside, gowns, veils, gloves, all left behind, donated or never retrieved. Gifts for future brides who no longer had mothers, or mothers who no longer had daughters. Most items are nameless, now absorbed into the slow rotation of second-hand weddings. But in 1902, when Lexington was preparing for its centennial fair, seamstress Miriam Ellis catalogued the collection. And while lifting a faded bridal veil of ivory bobbin lace, she noted a peculiar weight in the hem. She stitched it shut again, but she made a note and underlined it twice. The veil had no tag, no initials, no donation record. Its lace was English imported, far too fine for the average bride of Christ Covenant's charity bin. And yet, there it lay, folded, undisturbed, almost deliberately forgotten. But it was the hem that drew Miriam Ellis's hand. Tucked in the last curl of ivory bobbin lace was something rigid, flat, faintly ridged like dampened cardstock. Using a bone needle, she unpicked the seam, and there it was, folded 6 times, pressed flat by decades of secrecy. A train ticket, Lexington to Harrisburg, 1 passenger, 3rd class, dated June 4th, 1831. That date matters. In 1831, rail service between Kentucky and Pennsylvania wasn't a straight line. It was a trial. The journey would have demanded steamboat transfers at Cincinnati, a rough rail hop through Wheeling, and finally a seat on the fledgling Pennsylvania main line. This wasn't a wedding trip. It was a flight, a vanishing act. Printed in pale blue ink, the ticket bore one thing in pencil at the corner blith: no first name, no return fare. 2 days later, her name appeared again, barely. A handwritten petition submitted to Christ Covenant. My daughter left home under private blessing. She has not returned. Signed by Mrs. Blythe. The note was delivered, filed in the church's box of unprocessed grievances, but it was never approved. A red wax seal pierced through the corner, marked it dismissed. The 1830 census listed the Blythe home as mother and daughter only. By 1832, their address, 11 Burnett Lane, stood empty. The new owner, a pipe fitter named Leland Carr, made note of what remained: a scorched oil lamp, a child's hymn book, an envelope addressed to my Checkham, left unsigned. At the Fayette County Railway Office, a separate ledger titled Discrepant Tickets. Summer 1831 confirms it. 1 third-class fare, June 4th, was never claimed, not refunded, just untouched. The reason given: passenger not present, item left in chapel, no chapel named. In Wheeling, steamboat records list no passenger by the name Blythe, but the dockmaster on duty, a man named Winley, made one strange note: female traveler, alone, no bags. Manifest reads Miss Lexington. No newspaper reported her gone. But in the June 10th issue of the Western Luminary, a reader letter appeared. No name, no signature, just a sentence drifting like a ghost across the page. If a bride is sent without a name, she will reach no altar, nor grave, nor gate. The veil still rests in a sealed drawer. The ticket now flattened under glass. Both bear faint traces of lamp oil, odd for rail baggage, but common in church storage. There's no record of who sewed that hem. No clue why it was donated. But in the donation log for July 1831, a single quiet line appears. One bridal veil. Origin unremembered. The line for the donor's name left blank. No dash. Just a single pinhole punched clean through the paper. By late summer, a new hand had taken over Christ Covenant's ledgers. Reverend Nathaniel Clary. His penmanship, stiff, upright, seminary-trained, filled the columns with rigid precision. Every line noted what it should. Date, time, bride's full name, groom's name, witnesses, location, family present or not. But then came 3 entries. And a subtle deviation. The brides had all signed each in a composed, careful hand. Each name followed by a gentle loop, the local sign that her status had changed. But across from each, the groom's box was blank, not smudged, not erased, just indented. Not signatures, not even ghost ink, only soft depressions in the page, as though a hand had rested there, but never written. Church protocol required both signatures for a marriage record to be sealed and archived. When asked about it months later in a vestry session, Reverend Clary said nothing. Instead, in his private notes, he wrote a single line: the men were present in all ways but pen. Beneath that dated summer quarter, he drew a small symbol, 2 vertical lines joined at the top by a soft curve. No known church shorthand matches it. No reference ever cited it again. But there it sits still in the parish's dark ledger, pressed into calfskin, waiting. Beneath the unsigned boxes, those quiet blanks where a groom's name should have lived, the paper is unbroken, not torn, not abraded, just softly compressed. And in the 1960s, when forensic archivists used sidelight photography on the old ledger, they found something unmistakable: pressure marks, 4 fingers and a thumb. The exact shape of a hand poised to sign, but never did. Inserted into each of those ghostly entries, Reverend Clary had placed a vellum slip. A formal insertion recorded in parish notation, each one titled Confirmandum per Ministerium, Latin, confirmed by the ministry. Each slip bore only the reverend's initials. This was legal under Kentucky's ecclesiastical law, a rare clause that permitted a minister to attest to a ceremony when one party was spiritually present, even if not administratively verified. In 80 years of church records, only 4 such slips were ever used. 3 of them were Clary's, from the same summer, After the second of those silent weddings, the bride's father, a mason named George Layton, submitted a strange request. He didn't ask for a traditional certificate. He asked for a receipt of union, something notarized, something that could hold up in a land transfer. Reverend Clary's reply was polite, but vague. He issued a receipt with only the bride's name, no husband listed. Weeks later, the Fayette County Record Office filed an amendment. A land deed previously listed as passing to Mr. and Mrs. Blythe was changed. Now it passed only to Miss Layton, and beneath that, in neat civil handwriting, groom's name withheld pending verification. Beside it, a clerk's annotation, inquiry returned without subject. There was no wedding portrait, no newspaper notice. But if you turn to the back page of Christ Covenant's registry, beneath a forgotten sheet of blotting linen, you'll find a list, penciled, unofficial, unsealed, 3 names, all women, each followed by a dash, and beside each dash, a faint indent, as if the page had been pressed from behind. The hand that waited to sign didn't just hesitate, it paused, and then vanished. In the vestry box beneath Clary's final notes, a scrap of parchment remains. One unfinished sentence. It could have been a sermon, or not. The presence of a name is no proof of the man. In the weeks after Clary's handwritten note about the unsigned marriages, a quiet review began. The man behind it, parish clerk, Thomas Jurger. It wasn't official, not quite, but Jurger initiated a protocol audit attempting to verify the ceremonies by their witnesses' names listed in the ledger margins. 9 witnesses across the 3 disputed weddings. 5 were still in Lexington. They were contacted and sworn to write what they remembered. But what came back wasn't clarity. It was something emptier. Lucinda Harris, a widow on Bourbon Street, attended the May 14th wedding. She recalled the organ playing "Come Thou Fount," lilies brought by the bride's cousin, the feel of spring sun through stained glass. But when asked about the groom, she hesitated. Her statement read, "I cannot say I saw the man himself. I assumed he was present, though I did not look directly. I remember no speech from him, no face." Elias Tunard, a young watchmaker's apprentice, seated in the second pew on May 21st, gave a similar account. "I saw the bride walk the aisle. Her veil was stiff, netting pearl buttons on the edge. But I do not recall anyone receiving her at the altar. I thought perhaps the man had entered separately." 3 more affidavits echoed the same strange omission, each with subtle variation. None could place a groom at the altar. Not clearly. Then came Margaret Rowan. She went further. Under oath, she testified that she had walked the bride to the chapel herself alone. There was no carriage waiting outside. And after the ceremony, the bride lingered in the vestibule for several minutes before slipping down Market Street unaccompanied. Rowan's final line, "If there was a husband, I did not see him." There's no evidence that Reverend Clary himself ever questioned these witnesses. But Jurger's ledger, the one used for the audit, shows a change. On the back side of the affidavit collection, he scribbled a line. Simple. Pressed hard like a man trying not to feel doubt and failing. 3 ceremonies, 3 veils, and not a single escort. No witnesses stepped forward. no signatures graced the registry. Where others left behind names and warm recollections, these weddings left only absence. Normally, a supplementary folio was added to the parish marriage book where guests would record their presence. But in these 3 cases, the folios were gone. Not blank, removed. 5 pages neatly sliced out at the spine. Not torn, not misplaced, cut with precision, almost certainly, by someone who held the vestry chest key. In 1833, a church audit confirmed the mutilation. Parish clerk Thomas Jurger, troubled by the finding, reached out to the Fayette County Registrar. An external review was granted, but barely. The registrar dismissed the matter, calling the ceremonies sealed in spirit if not in form. Case closed, except something else came back with the review papers, tucked quietly into an unmarked envelope. Just one folded page, a petition, dated 7 days after the final disputed wedding. 9 signatures, all from the Ladies' Committee for the protection of domestic rights, and a single chilling line. We seek clarity on the status of our daughters whose husbands do not speak, do not write, and cannot be summoned. The envelope bore no sender. It was never filed, and it was never followed up. That year, Reverend Clary never performed another marriage. In August, he took a leave of absence, citing clerical fatigue. His pen vanished from the ledger until the following spring, and by the time it returned, someone else had vanished. Not a groom, but a bride. That summer heat warped the window panes in Boone Creek, a quiet shuttered town, pressed into the Cumberland Trace, like it was hiding from time itself. It was there in a weather-worn chapel near the tree line that a stranger arrived. A woman calling herself Mrs. Laura Halcombe. She approached with nothing more than a folded handkerchief and an unusual request. She claimed to be the widow of Eliza Thornton, one of the 3 nameless brides wed in May. Now maybe pause with me here, dear listener, because already this story is turned backward. Widows speak of husbands lost, not wives. But Laura Halcombe made no plea for property, no cry for inheritance. She asked only one thing: may I see the record in my own hand? With Clary still absent, the request fell to Jurger. His notes, still filed today in the back of the vestry ledger, are sparse but haunted. Says she's from Georgetown. Wife's name Eliza Thornton. No year of meeting, no ring. Offered a veil, and what a veil it was. Preserved now among the parish's rare holdings, ivory tulle edged in blue lace, unlike anything common to Lexington in 1831. No visible wear, unused, but on the inside in fine needlepoint. Visible only by oil lamplight, 3 stitched letters. A.T.H. Eliza Thornton? Yes. But that last letter H was not her own. It matched the woman standing before them. Halcombe. The veil didn't belong to a groom. It belonged to the supposed widow. When asked for proof of marriage or an obituary, Mrs. Halcombe offered nothing. The ceremony, she said, was sealed by pledge. She mentioned a women's prayer circle in Georgetown that helped with the binding. No names, no address. Just a folded cloth she briefly unwrapped, revealing a worn bit of muslin inked with a verse, bound in light but kept from name. One vow said twice, one veil remains. Then she tucked it away. Jurger, uncertain whether she was a lost soul or a skilled liar, logged her name privately. Not in the church record, but in his own personal book. In the margin, he scribbled, "No record, no proof, a second veil without a first." 1 week later, Jurger made a quiet journey to Georgetown, just a page from the ledger in his bag. Just a question in his heart. Could anyone vouch for this widow? Or for Eliza Thornton? But the address Halcombe had given on Cannon Road was ash. A one-room clapper frame that had burned in 1826, 5 years prior. Lightning. Verified in court documents. The land had never been rebuilt. He stood there surrounded by soot-blackened stones and wrote in his journal, her past was never here. Back in Lexington, Jurger placed the veil in the vestry chest, beside the unused communion plates and the winter candles. He thought it was over. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, another woman stepped through another chapel door, this time 70 miles south. She called herself Mrs. Thorne, and she carried a veil almost identical in every thread. Almost. Her veil bore a different date and a different set of initials. There's a boarding house you see at the corner of Milan Cross. No sign out front. No lights. No advertisements. Those who stayed there already knew where it was. It belonged to Agnes Muir, a widow with her own rules. No walk-ins, no refunds. Rooms paid in advance by letter. Left empty if no guest arrived. Room 4 stayed that way, shut tight, for 3 months. But Agnes had rented it out 3 times to 3 different brides on 3 different days, each under a different name. We'll pick up with them soon. But as you drift through the quiet of Boone Creek or peer across the stone ruins of a home that never was, just ask yourself, who were these brides marrying? And why must every witness disappear? We'll return just beyond the next veil. The receipts told a strange story, each one stamped with the same courier services mark, but never a trace of handwriting from the brides themselves. No notes, no names, no instructions. Just a neat payment, always in coin, for a 6-night stay. Always 6. And always for the same room. Agnes Muir, who kept the logbook at the boarding house between May and July of 1831, noticed something odd. The reservations followed a pattern. They always came just days after weddings at Christ Covenant Church. And yet, none of the women ever arrived. The trunks sat in the hallway untouched. Room 4 remained in pristine condition. Sheets, uncreased dust, undisturbed pillows, hollow. As if time skipped over it. The room never spoke a word. But silence has its own weight. That summer, Deputy Marshal Dorsey Emlyn, visiting from New Haven, was asked to inspect the property. The church's temporary clerk had quietly raised questions, perhaps troubled by too many quiet things happening at once. Emlyn's report, which still sits in the Lexington Circuit Court archives, is detailed and unsettling. Room 4, he wrote, was in perfect order. Too perfect. The bed had never been turned. The dust atop the dresser was shallow and unbroken. The single pillow bore no indentation of a head, and beneath the windowsill sat one trunk, unlocked but empty. The window itself was odd, painted shut, as if someone had meant to seal it from the inside. The trunk was wedged tightly between the floorboards and the plastered base trim. It had not moved in months. Tucked just behind the sill, Emlyn discovered a folded slip of paper. No envelope, no date, 3 even creases across the length. Inside, in faint, nearly vanished graphite, was a single sentence. I was told this is where I would remember. Vague, chilling. The kind of message you don't forget even if you try. And oddly enough, 2 years later exactly that phrase resurfaced. This time it was part of a letter mailed from Harrodsburg. The envelope had no return address and was signed only with the initials MT. The recipient, not the church, not the boarding house, but a modest tailor shop known for repairing veils. What was happening here? Back in room 4, no more clues ever surfaced. The trunk had no monogram, no lining, no traces of paper. The key remained on the hallway peg unclaimed. Agnes Muir curiously never attempted to re-rent the room. Whether out of superstition or silent understanding, she kept marking it as occupied through the winter, long after the rest of the house turned over with merchants and widows seeking lodging. In her December 1831 ledger, Agnes recorded a rent payment from a Miss T. No surname, no documentation. Just a note beside it, paid in coin. Did not ascend. No one, it seemed, had seen any woman enter the 3rd floor that month. No one heard the trunk being removed. But by February, the key was gone. And so was the trunk. Just vanished. The note, however, remained in the clerk's office. Its graphite fainter now, but its creases still sharp. 3 folds, 1 direction, no address. Now here's where things take another strange turn. Let's drift back to the church itself, specifically to pew 6C. By early 1832, the wooden pew bore odd scratch marks along the right edge, as if from a cane or boots. During a seasonal cleaning, a volunteer named Edwin Greer lifted the seat cushion for brushing and found something tucked into a split seam. A tight fold wedged into the joint between the seat and backrest. Another note, unlined paper, cream-colored, almost brittle. Again, no envelope, no seal, and the message: she was the 5th. The next will be quicker. Unlike the first note, this one wasn't written in the traditional copperplate style taught in Kentucky schools. Instead, the handwriting slanted, left irregular spacing sharp loops in the capital S. It had the urgency of someone unused to writing, or in a hurry. Greer turned it over. Nothing. Clean except for a faint oil blot where fingers had pressed it closed. The church's vestry clerk, Mr. Horace Bell, logged the finding on February 12th. And in the margin, he added a small note, loose scrap, beneath pew 6C. Refer to May 31st, marriage docket. May 1831. That month had seen 3 weddings. One of them, according to church records, was between Miss Elenina Fay and a groom listed only with a dash. Yes, a dash, not a name. Miss Fay had booked room 4, paid in coin, never arrived. Her trunk was later retrieved again by no known visitor. With the second note, something shifted. For the first time, the officials involved began to suspect a sequence, not random disappearances, but a pattern, perhaps even a plan. She was the 5th. The next would be quicker. Still no word of this ever reached the congregation. No sermons addressed it. No city notice was filed. But the note was saved. It rests today in Bell's original logbook, its ink faded but legible. Years later, in 1903, a chemical analysis was conducted at Transylvania College. The paper was traced to a specific batch sold by an apothecary on Ashland Pike, then run by a man named Garrett Wren. Among Wren's receipts was one from early 1831, a small purchase by a customer listed only as CT. No follow-up purchases, no listed address, and no bride in the registry with those initials. But wait, we're not done. That same month, Christ Covenant Church filed a maintenance request, a window repair near the rear choir submitted by hand. It was unsigned, but the handwriting matched the note. The request read, "For light in winter. Cold benches affect attendance." You tell me, was that just about a drafty church window or something colder entirely? The winter was mild, but attendance was down considerably. Families in the parish whispered that a serious mistake had occurred at one of the weddings, that something had not been recorded properly. Reverend Clary had completely dismissed the rumor in a printed notice, but the original notice did not bear the church's official seal. And the strangest thing of all, just below the ink that had leaked from another sheet of paper pressed over it, was a note in charcoal pencil. Names disappear more easily than faces. Who wrote it and why was not known, but the paper used matched exactly the one that had been tucked under the pew. Then, on March 4th, another wedding was recorded, and again, without the groom's name. The records at Christ Covenant Church had long been considered a standard for accuracy. The binding was calfskin, the paper thick, and every line was written in the expert handwriting of Reverend Elijah Clary. For 2 decades, no one suspected a thing. Until the spring of 1832, when a clerk named Tobias Wren transferred the records to the county archives, he noticed something strange. 2 records for the same ceremony, but in 2 different books. At first he thought one was a draft, the other official. But when he looked closely, something sent a chill down Wren's spine. In the first book, the ceremony dated February 17th was recorded, a Miss Letitia Moore married a Louis Stratton. Witnesses were the bride's brother and a merchant from Winchester. The ink was faint, like an iron ink that had faded with age. It all seemed right, but in the second book, also signed by Clary. For the same day, there was only the bride's name. No groom, no witnesses. The line for the groom's name was just a dash. The ink was darker, the handwriting careful and slow, as if it were attempting something more important than a routine entry. Even more haunting, the second book was not in the main archives. It had been discovered in a locked drawer of the desk in the prep room, only opened after Clary had left for the convent in Danville. The book had never been recorded in any previous inventory. Wren reported the discovery to the elder men, who immediately ordered a full audit of the records. Within a week, 7 more weddings were found to have duplicate entries. In the main book, both names and witnesses were complete. But in the secret book, only the bride's name and Clary's signature were included. 3 of these brides later disappeared from Lexington's official records. The ink in the side ledger was taken to the archives and tested with a solution of vinegar and tannin. The results showed a higher than normal level of galantanic acid, meaning the ink had not been purchased locally. It was either homemade or ordered elsewhere. And in fact, the ink had not been sold in Lexington during the time the weddings had taken place. A loose sheet of paper was found, tucked into the back cover of the side ledger. On it was written also in Clary's handwriting, where names are not written, bonds cannot be broken. No one knew where the phrase had come from. It did not match any church doctrine or canon. No date, no footnote. Attempts to contact Reverend Clary were thwarted. He had extended his retreat and refused all correspondence. The church elders, fearing unrest, decided to temporarily close the marriage records without giving any explanation to the parishioners. Meanwhile, another detail emerged. Witnesses in the main registers, some of whom had never been confirmed as residents of Fayette County. 2 names were completely absent from any records. No homes, no registration, no church membership. And between the pages of the side registers, there was a conspicuous blank space. A blank, unlined piece of paper was between June and July. When examined closely, a faint imprint was visible, as if there had been writing, but somehow it had been erased. What was the original content? No one knows. But the ink did not bleed. The name did not remain. Now do you remember Leticia Moore? Another surprising discovery about her came from an unexpected place, the land survey. In early 1832, a clerk at the Fayette County Courthouse was reviewing the census records from 1830 to settle a land dispute when she made a discovery. The name Leticia Moore appeared twice on 2 different census records, just weeks apart, and in 2 different places. A Covington record listed her as Leticia M. Harland, age 21, living as a maid for a retired schoolteacher. Meanwhile, in Lexington, she was listed as Leticia Moore, dependent on a family on Mill Street. Neither record mentioned a husband. No record of a marriage or a name change. Sounds strange to you, double records? Deleted pages? A minister who disappeared in the middle of a retreat. And brides literally disappeared. Don't take your eyes off the story. Every detail slowly unfolds like a forgotten sad song. And sometimes what's not recorded is the scariest part. The handwriting on the 2 census entries wasn't identical, but it was close. Both listed the same spelling, age, and birthplace for a young woman named Leticia. Now, for those of you who've ever dived into 19th century census records, you'll know how chaotic they could be. Enumerators were barely trained, often scribbling names and facts by ear. But here's the twist. Duplicate entries across county lines were extremely rare, and when they did happen, there were usually notes explaining the confusion. This case had none, so investigators dug deeper into the records from the Covington residence. Inside a drawer of what had once been the schoolmaster's desk, they found an employment ledger from September 1830. It listed a Leticia Harland as a live-in assistant paid for just 2 months. Payments stopped suddenly on October 3rd with no note of resignation or dismissal. No forwarding address, nothing. But then came a discovery that gave everyone pause: a receipt for a stagecoach fare to Lexington, dated October 4th, tucked neatly inside the same ledger. The ticket was purchased in Covington and made out to Miss E. Harland. It bore the signature of a coach agent named Ames Durl, who had long since passed away. But as fate would have it, his daughter Eliza still lived in town. She'd kept her father's carbon copy travel folios stacked in a weathered cabinet like forgotten relics. There, amid ink-pressed receipts for livestock deliveries and funeral fares, was an entry for Miss L. Harlan with a curious scribble beside it: refused trunk. Said it would find her. Meanwhile, parish records at Christ Covenant Church in Lexington offered another breadcrumb. Their dated February 17, 1831, was a marriage entry for one Letitia Moore. No groom listed, no witnesses. The space where a name should have been stood, blank. Letitia's family confirmed she never came home after the ceremony. They'd assumed she'd eloped or died. But if you've been following the thread, dear listener, you may already sense it. These weren't just duplicate identities. The chilling implication was that both entries might have been true, that Letitia had existed in two places, under two names for a fleeting moment. One entered in ink, the other quietly erased. Investigator Clark turned his attention to the Lexington home listed in the 1830 census. It still stood brick foundation. Greek revival cornices, the kind of house that seems to watch you back. The room Letitia once occupied had been sealed by her grieving mother. It wasn't opened until 1832 after her mother's death. During the probate, they found a porcelain basin upstairs. Inside it, a folded scrap of paper. The message, written in the same slanted hand as the coach receipt, read only, "I did not change my name. It was taken." The ink had blurred across the folds like water trailing down glass. The paper was never submitted to any official record. And in the 1831 state census, Letitia's name was gone. As if she'd never been. Now to another haunting case. In a stone cottage just east of Limestone Street, investigators entered the attic of the Maddox family home. It was there in a cedar chest, wrapped in waxed cloth, that they found a family Bible. A wedding gift never opened since the disappearance of Agnes Maddox, another bride married at Christ Covenant Church to an unnamed groom. In the early 1800s, family Bibles were more than scripture, they were historical ledgers. People recorded births, baptisms, marriages, deaths, everything. Agnes's birth was there, ink faded to rust. Her baptism followed. Then, silence. Where her marriage record should have begun, the first page was missing. Not torn, not ripped, cut with a precision that felt clinical. The edge was unnaturally straight, as though sliced with ruler and blade. The next page jumped straight to the name of her younger brother, unmarried, and irrelevant to the mystery. The Bible had been closed and stored shortly after Agnes left, for what her family believed was her honeymoon. But Agnes never returned. Never sent word, never looked back. A neighbor later recalled helping her carry a suitcase to a waiting carriage. Agnes, she said, kept her eyes on the road. In the same cedar chest, among yellowed linens and silver combs, lay a folded handbill from a traveling notary's office in Frankfurt. It was dated June 1831 and offered legal certification for family Bibles, an essential service in the rural South where official court records were often unreachable. But on the back of the handbill was a penciled note in unfamiliar handwriting, not necessary. Already witnessed, the note didn't match any family member's hand. Investigators traced it to the notary's dissolved estate, where they found only one surviving logbook from that summer. Dozens of notarized marriages and inheritances were listed, all mundane, except for the glaring absence, no Agnes Maddox. Not then, not ever. The pages covering the week of June 15th had simply vanished. Archivists, in a final attempt to trace what might have been torn away, reached out to the First Parish Library of Lexington. The library had recently accepted a donation, an odd, mismatched collection of religious fragments and discarded family volumes. Most were brittle and unsorted. But buried in the stack there, it was a single unbound folio page, a familiar floral border curled around the edges unmistakably from the Maddox family editions printed by Crane and Son of New York. It was a page intended for recording a marriage, but the space where names should have been written was completely blank. In the lower margin, written in a firm, slanted cursive, a chilling line. He said, "Names do not hold." Beneath it, a faint red smudge. Sealing wax, perhaps. Blood, perhaps not. The page had never been folded. It hadn't been mailed, hadn't been tucked away. It was simply there, waiting. Later examination revealed a watermark, Crane batch, 1828, a stock sold commonly at Lexington's general stores. But how it traveled from a Maddox-bound register to a forgotten pile in the parish library, no one could say. And then in the spring of 1833, almost 2 years to the day, since the unnamed weddings, the Maddox family sold their property without fanfare. The sale record is still held in the county clerk's office. One line in particular stands out, one item, marked for destruction, by family wood frame, portrait unsigned. There was no sitter, no likeness, no image, just a blank canvas, an empty rectangle, an erasure. Have you ever seen a portrait of nothing, friends? Sometimes absence is its own message. In the rear room of Christ Covenant Church, behind the vestry, past the last dusty stack of hymnals stored for spring weddings, stood a narrow, aging cabinet. Once used for communion linens and borrowed shawls, it now stood forgotten. Its drawers, warped from humidity and softened by time, hadn't been inventoried since before the war. And it was there in early spring of 1833, while preparing the church for an expansion, that a groundskeeper named Amos Bell forced open the bottom drawer. What he found was barely the size of a finger. Wrapped tightly in brittle ledger paper was a sewing needle, dulled but intact. The paper, recognizable as parish stationery from the early 1830s, bore no message. But it did hold something more intimate and more cryptic. 4 sets of initials, each penned in a different hand. ETSHML. And finally, SH again. The ink on that final set of initials was darker, the impression deeper, as if written separately, intentionally, with deliberation, as if someone had waited for the others to dry, and then pressed their message in just a bit harder. Those initials: Eliza Toland, Susan Hammer, Miriam Lott. The very same women from the disputed registry. Brides with no recorded grooms. Brides who within weeks of their ceremonies were gone. But the duplication of Susan Hammer's initials, that was harder to explain. Could it be an error, or were there 2 ceremonies, 2 claims, 2 vanishings? The needle at first seemed unremarkable, just a fine gauge sewing tool. But in many rural communities, such objects held layered meaning. They were tokens passed between women to mark marriages, births, even deaths, or in darker corners of tradition to protest, to remember. These needles were tucked into hems, slipped into Bibles, hidden inside drawers just like the one Amos opened. The wrapping bore a watermark, Miller & Son, Louisville, issued late 1831. The church had ordered that particular stock only once. The surviving invoice recovered years later from the vestry ledger listed 12 communion cards, 7 yards of white muslin, 3 blank marriage certificates, no mention of a needle, no veil, no thread. A blot of ink near the initials had bled into the paper, the telltale sign of a hurried dip, a nervous hand. The edges of the page were pristine, no signs of folding or wear. It hadn't been carried, hadn't been passed, just wrapped, sealed and left. When shown to a local seamstress, she noted the needle size wasn't suited for garments. It was, she said, quietly, a veil needle or a shroud. The object was eventually catalogued in the church's modest artifact register under the curious label Unclaimed Ledger Insert, April 1833. But no explanation was ever added. No entry listed why it had been stored in that drawer. No liturgical reference, no widow's inventory. And strangely, the drawer's key, when tested, matched none of the other church cabinets in circulation. It didn't belong. Later that summer, as construction workers prepared the rear section of the church for modest repairs, one of the brick masons uncovered a rusted hinge embedded in the wall, just a few feet from the cabinet. A hinge, no door, no frame, just the quiet suggestion that once this wall might have opened or concealed something long forgotten. Would you have opened it if you were there? Would you have looked inside? Because it's worth remembering, in Lexington in the summer of 1833, the walls weren't just holding up a church. They were holding something back. No records mention what it once held. No curious parishioner, no official note, no whispered recollection. Just gone. What lingered, however, was stranger still: the initials SH etched twice into the wooden baseboard. Once faint, like something time tried to erase. Then again, right beside it, bold, recent, deliberate. In the last weeks of Reverend Josiah Halcombe's life, something shifted. A hush fell over the Christ Covenant parsonage. Neighbors noted the sound of coughing that grew harsher, never quite ending, followed by stretches of heavy quiet. The curtains remained drawn even at noon. His Sunday sermons became clipped, breathless, and then stopped altogether. By then, Halcombe was 73. He had presided over Christ Covenant Church since its founding in 1795, nearly half a century of weddings, funerals, baptisms, and blessings. Some recorded in Bibles, others only remembered in the rustle of community tales. After his death on October 9, 1840, the parish trustees assembled a modest inventory of his personal effects. Mostly the expected sermon notes, faded bank slips, calendars pinned with cedar twigs, but beneath them, tucked tightly into a leather-bound folio, was a sealed envelope. The wax was brittle, imperfect. It opened with almost no effort, inside a single sheet of parchment. The ink was unblotted, the handwriting unmistakably Halcombe's narrow, steady practice. Dated 1 month before his death. No recipient, no title. Just this. To sign where no name is offered is to assume what cannot be undone. I have stood before brides who came alone and left the church unchanged. I was not given their names, not fully. And yet, I signed. I sealed. I declared. What I officiated cannot be annulled because it was never agreed upon in full. I was the witness to a void. My hand, not my judgment, was used. The signature, if it could be called that, was nearly illegible. J. Halcombe ink, thinning out as if the Reverend had lost the strength halfway through. Strangely, it wasn't a confession. There was no request for forgiveness, no biblical grace, no final prayer. Instead, it read like an unsent legal memo. Or perhaps a final accounting to no one in particular. A cold, personal reckoning. Behind that letter, pressed against old property notes and funeral records, was a second sheet, water-damaged and torn. Just a few words survived. They arrived veiled, but not to wed. Let that sit with you for a moment. The document was discovered by the church secretary Elias Dean. He gave it to the newly appointed reverend, who noted it, but made no official entry in the church's journal. Eventually, the envelope was filed among routine correspondence. No sermon ever mentioned it. No newsletter hinted at its contents. Only a faint pencil annotation unmailed, private, marked its place in the archives. But it haunted the trustees. Not just the claim of unnamed weddings, but the wording. I was not given their names. It suggested something unsettling, that Reverend Halcombe hadn't acted alone. Someone else, unnamed, unaccounted for, had given him those brides. Someone had orchestrated it, arranged it. When church officials quietly reviewed Halcombe's marriage entries between 1830 and 1833, the same years the unnamed brides had appeared, they found a subtle but undeniable pattern. A few records stood out. The Reverend's signature was clear, but the space for the groom's name was either blank or marked with a single dash. No annotations, no explanations, just quiet ink on old paper. They looked like normal entries unless you knew where to look. In the weeks following Halcombe's burial, a statewide initiative prompted churches to reconcile their marriage logs with county clerical records. It was part of Kentucky's growing push for administrative standardization. Christ Covenant Church, wanting to appear meticulous and modern, complied. And that's when something else surfaced. An entry dated April 2nd, 1832. The wedding of one Miss Clara Emmons from Jessamine County. In the church's large cloth-bound register, the certificate was clear and complete. 3 witnesses, Mrs. Miriam Holloway, Mr. Ephraim Goss, and a third, known only by the initials S.W. But that last signature was peculiar. The letters weren't inked. They were pressed like someone had hesitated with a dry pen, as though they couldn't bring themselves to commit the name to paper, only the impression of it. Still, it was legible enough. But when that same certificate was requested from the Fayette County Courthouse archives, the trail began to split. We'll continue with what the courthouse file revealed and why it may have never matched what the church believed to be true. Stay with us. The church elders, fearing unrest, decided to temporarily close the marriage records without giving any explanation to the parishioners. Meanwhile, another detail emerged: witnesses in the main registers, some of whom had never been confirmed as residents of Fayette County. 2 names were completely absent from any records: no homes, no registration, no church membership. And between the pages of the side registers, there was a conspicuous blank space. A blank, unlined piece of paper was between June and July. When examined closely, a faint imprint was visible, as if there had been writing, but somehow it had been erased. What was the original content? No one knows. But the ink did not bleed. The name did not remain. Now, do you remember? Letitia Moore. Another surprising discovery about her came from an unexpected place, the land survey. In early 1832, a clerk at the Fayette County Courthouse was reviewing the census records from 1830 to settle a land dispute when she made a discovery. The name Letitia Moore appeared twice on two different census records, just weeks apart, and in two different places. A Covington record listed her as Letitia M. Harland, age 21, living as a maid for a retired school teacher. Meanwhile, in Lexington, she was listed as Letitia Moore, dependent on a family on Mill Street. Neither record mentioned a husband. No record of a marriage or a name change. Oh, sounds strange to you, double records. Deleted pages. A minister who disappeared in the middle of a retreat. And brides literally disappeared. Don't take your eyes off the story. Every detail slowly unfolds like a forgotten sad song. And sometimes what's not recorded is the scariest part. The names dissolved not by time but by intent. Clara R. Emmons, Lenora Wexley, and the others who stood at that altar beside silence, left behind a trail so delicate it crumbled under breath. Their weddings were never announced. In the paper, their grooms never entered the census. Their lives redirected down corridors without record. What remains, scraps of ink ash pressed into parchment graphite notes tucked beneath signatures, isn't enough to reconstruct their stories fully, but perhaps just enough to feel them. What do we do with a mystery that resists unraveling? Here at Sleepy History Tales, we don't always seek tidy endings. Sometimes, the most haunting stories are those where the absence is louder than the presence, where the scratched out name, the lost petition, or the phrase, "he asked to sit alone," always says more than pages ever could. If you're still with us, dear listener, thank you. Thank you for walking down these creaking floorboards of the past with us, peering into the fog of records. Half burned, names half whispered. Maybe someone out there knows who S. Whitmer was. Maybe someone remembers why that veil was never worn. Or maybe these women were meant to be forgotten, erased, hidden beneath dashes and soot. But tonight, they were remembered. If this story stirred something in you, some unease, some sadness, or simply a curiosity that won't settle, don't let it go. That's how the past speaks. Not in clarity, but in echo. Until next time, sleep well and dream carefully.